Standing in the golden savannah, Mark watched the albino lioness and her cub disappear into the hills. The wind whispered across the tall grass, and for a moment, the world felt calm. But deep down, he knew their journey had only just begun. Returning to the wild meant new challenges not just for the lions, but for him as well. This was more than just a release. It was a commitment. The sun was high, casting a harsh, brilliant light over the rolling plains. Mark adjusted his backpack, his eyes scanning the horizon. He followed at a safe distance, a silent guardian, careful not to cause them any stress. His goal was simple, but immense, to ensure they were truly safe and that this precious cub could survive without human help. The mother lioness was magnificent, her white coat a stark contrast to the ochre landscape. Occasionally she would glance back, her golden eyes meeting his for a brief, knowing second before she melted back into the tall grass. It was a look that communicated a shared purpose. Within just a few hours, the cub's boundless curiosity got the better of it. It wandered a little too close to a herd of impalas grazing quietly in the distance. Instinct took over. The cub crouched low, its eyes wide with intense focus, every muscle in its small body tensed for action. The mother let out a soft hiss, a signal of caution that rippled through the air. Mark froze, holding his breath, his camera still. Then, in a sudden burst of youthful energy, the cub pounced not to attack, but to play. The impalas bolted in a blur of brown and white, disappearing in a cloud of dust. The cub, caught up in its own momentum, stumbled and fell, tumbling head over heels into a patch of thorny shrubs. Mark's heart leaped into his throat, and he took a step forward, worried it might be hurt. But before he could get close, the cub emerged, shaking its head, completely unfazed. It blinked in the bright sunlight, its pale eyes full of wonder. The mother walked over and licked its head, a soft, powerful reminder of the wild lessons it would need to learn. Mark smiled to himself. The cub had survived the dangers posed by humans, but he now realized the wild itself was a teacher far harsher and more relentless than any poacher. As the sun began its descent, the entire savannah transformed. Shadows stretched like long fingers across the plains, and the air grew cool. Mark set up a small, discreet camp at a safe distance and watched the lions through his binoculars as they settled for the night. The sounds of the African night began to fill the air, the distant whooping cries of hyenas echoed across the landscape, and the constant rustle of unseen predators in the grass kept his senses sharp. He was a visitor here, and he knew it. At one point, the cub let out a small whimper, curling tightly beside its mother for warmth and protection. Mark's heart clenched. He had removed them from human danger, but the world they now inhabited was full of threats. Rival lions from other prides, leopards hunting in the shadows, packs of hungry hyenas, and the silent danger of venomous snakes. Suddenly, a fluid movement on the ridge caught his eye. A leopard, its powerful muscles rippling under the moonlight, slinked along the high ground, its gaze fixed below. The lioness let out a low, guttural growl, a silent command for her cub to stay low and out of sight. The leopard paused, its head tilted, assessing the situation. It weighed its chances, the potential for a meal against the certainty of a fierce fight with a protective mother. Then, as if deciding it wasn't worth the risk, the leopard melted back into the night, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared.
Nice.
Mark let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The mother was teaching her cub how to survive, how to be invisible, how to respect the other powers of the night. He was their silent guardian, but she was its true teacher. 3 days later, they reached a wide, churning river. The recent monsoon rains had swelled its banks, turning it into a fast and violent torrent. Mark could see the dark shapes of crocodiles lurking just beneath the surface, their eyes breaking the waters calm like dark, floating stones. The lioness paused at the water's edge, sniffing the air, her ears twitching. She glanced at Mark, then back at her cub. He knew what she was doing. She was assessing the risks, calculating her cub's strength against the river's power. The crossing wasn't impossibly wide, maybe 20 meters, but the current was dangerously treacherous. With a deep breath, the mother stepped into the water first, testing its depth and pull. Mark stayed back, his hands tense, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. She reached the middle, her strokes strong and controlled, with the cub paddling furiously behind her. but the current was stronger than she'd anticipated. The cub slipped under the surface for a heart-stopping moment, its head bobbing back up in a panic. Without thinking, Mark grabbed a long, sturdy branch from the riverbank and extended it toward the struggling cub. The lioness growled, a sound of agitation and encouragement, urging her cub forward. With a combination of the mother's fierce instinct and Mark's careful assistance, they finally reached the opposite bank. The lioness shook the water from her coat, droplets sparkling like diamonds in the sunlight. The cub, exhausted but unharmed, nuzzled against her neck. Mark wiped sweat from his brow, his own adrenaline finally receding. This river crossing was a critical test, not just of strength, but of trust. He realized that in the wild, just as in the human world, teamwork is essential for survival. The very next day, as they moved cautiously through a stretch of tall grass, Mark froze. Faint but unmistakable scent carried on the wind. Humans. Poachers. He instinctively crouched, making a low sound to alert the lions. The lioness immediately lowered her body, her white fur blending surprisingly well into the pale, dry grass. The cub mirrored her perfectly, dropping low to the ground. Mark crawled behind a termite mound, his heart pounding against his ribs. A patrol of armed men appeared over the rise, their eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of movement. One of the poachers raised a pair of binoculars, looking directly in their direction. Mark ducked his head just in time. For what felt like an eternity, the lions remained absolutely still, silent shadows in the grass. The minutes stretched on, thick with tension. Finally, the poachers moved on, their voices fading into the distance. The mother gave a low, rumbling purr, reassuring her cub that the danger had passed. Mark let out a quiet, shaky breath. The freedom he had fought so hard to secure was still so fragile. The threat of poachers was a constant, looming shadow that could return at any moment. Over the following days, Mark's role shifted. He stayed with the lions, but now he was teaching them indirectly, subtly. He would show the cub how to use the wind to its advantage, how to read tracks in the dirt, how to recognize the alarm calls of different birds that signaled danger. He watched as the cub began to move with a newfound confidence, stalking insects, small lizards, and even trying to pounce on low-flying birds. Each tiny success, no matter how small, brought a spark of pride to the mother Siand, a pang of bittersweet joy to Mark his heart. One afternoon they encountered a large herd of zebras. The mother crouched low, her body a coiled spring, and the cub mimicked her every move. Mark watched from a distance as the mother taught one of the most vital skills of all, patience. They waited and waited. The hunt, the stalk, the strike it, was a dance of survival. The cub pounced too early and failed, but the mother simply nudged it forward, encouraging it to try again. These small victories were building the foundation, turning a vulnerable cub into a formidable predator, capable of surviving entirely on its own. On the 10th day, disaster struck from the sky. A bolt of lightning from a dry storm ignited the parched grass. Smoke billowed into the air, and flames spread with terrifying speed, turning the peaceful savannah into a roaring orange furnace. Mark acted quickly. He knew they had to get to the river. He began guiding the lions toward the water, but the cub, overwhelmed by the smoke and noise, panicked, darted in the wrong direction, straight toward the advancing wall of fire. Mark didn't hesitate. He ran, shouting its name, dodging falling embers, and leaping over burning bushes. The cub skidded to a halt, confused and terrified, but the mother was right there. She intercepted it, nudging it forcefully toward safety. Together with Mark keeping a safe distance, the three of them plunged into the river, escaping the blaze and reaching the wet, muddy ground on the other side. The fire had been terrifying, but the shared experience had bonded them even more deeply. Mark realized he was no longer just a guardian or an observer, he was an integral part of their story, a silent witness to the wild's unforgiving cruelty and its breathtaking beauty. Weeks turned into a month. The lions grew stronger, bolder, and more self-reliant with each passing day. The cub was no longer a cub. It could stalk prey with skill, hide from threats with instinct, and navigate treacherous rivers on its own. Its playful pounces had turned into calculated strikes. Mark knew his time with them was coming to an end. On what he knew would be their final morning together, he watched as the mother nudged her young one forward, encouraging it to take the lead. The young lion glanced back at Mark, its golden eyes filled not with dependence, but with trust and a deep, quiet recognition. Mark raised his hand in a silent wave of farewell. The lioness and her nearly grown cub turned and disappeared into the rolling hills of the savannah. Mark stood alone, the wind in his hair, his heart full. He had rescued them from a cage, but out here, in the heart of Africa, they had found true freedom. And he knew that freedom was the greatest gift he could ever give. As the sun rose higher, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and amber, he smiled. Somewhere out there in the vast, wild expanse, a rare albino lion would not just survive, would thrive.
Thanks for watching.
If you are moved by this story, please follow our channel for more journeys into the wild.